Reddit, what is the worst wedding ceremony you have attended? Why was it bad? Bride doesn't show up after 2 hours of waiting, then calls to tell the groom that she changed her mind. Groom starts crying and his mom shouts, "Shut the freak up. I told you to marry Kathy, but no, Kathy was too fat, huh? You just had to chase a model. She couldn't even wipe her ass with those nails, much less cook your dinner. Why would Jessica want you? You're broke and you're ugly. Kathy wouldn't have stood you up cause she ugly too. Serves you right." Groom continues to cry while the guests stared in shock. Yes, people, Kathy was there. But just like everyone else, she was afraid to confront the mom. She did give him a hug afterwards though. There were no tables and chairs. Like none. They had an open bar but no freaking chairs. Everyone had to put their drink on the ground and hold their plate to eat. It was freaking crazy. Everyone just assumed that some sort of terrible thing happened, where the tables and chair people didn't bring them, but afterwards I asked her, the bride, what happened, and she just said, "Oh, we would have had to pay extra for that." My cousin got married in an eastern Kentucky small town, more of a holler, really. It was at least an hour drive from any hotels. Their wedding was in late June. In the middle of a field. In full sun. His wife designed the flowers and decorations, which amounted to some really sad-looking shade plants wilting in the sun, still in their plastic pots with hooks attached, just sitting in the aisle. It was above 90 degrees out, and they were 45 minutes late starting the ceremony. While we were sitting there, cooking in the sun, sweating through our nice clothes, they provided bottled water to help us cool down. But no one brought ice. The bottles were stored, warm, with no ice, in bright orange 20-gallon buckets with rope handles, which were placed on either side of the aisle. They did not do any kind of insect treatment to this field before the event. Mosquitoes and chiggers. Everywhere. The reception was held in the middle school cafeteria just down the road. They reused the prom decorations for their reception. Because in this holler, apparently the high school prom happens in the middle school cafeteria. It smelled like old macaroni and cheese. The provided meal was quartered squares of bologna and ham sandwiches on Wonder Bread with a spread of condiments. The wedding cake was from Walmart. I should specify at this point that money was not an issue. They had a fairly large budget. They just thought this was good. I went to a church wedding in Korea. I had been to other Korean weddings and knew that most people just show up to drop off their gift, money, and then hit the buffet, and attending the actual wedding ceremony isn't really required/expected for most guests. What surprised me about this one was sitting in the church for the actual ceremony, and how nobody who even came in was paying attention. Everyone was on their iPads or smartphones. I saw lots of people just playing Angry Birds, this was 3 years ago, and a few just full-on having phone conversations during the ceremony. Just blew my mind. These weren't children, these were middle-aged adults. Why even go inside if you are just going to text message or play cell phone games? I attended a female co-worker's wedding. She and the groom were both very young, teenagers, and very religious. The father walks the bride down the aisle, and it looks like we're in for a beautiful ceremony. But once they arrive next to the groom, the father proceeds to give the groom a lecture on how he will now be responsible for the spiritual well-being of the bride. How he, the father, has been her spiritual leader her whole life up to now, but the groom is taking over. While giving this speech, the father managed to strike a terrifying figure, one of those, "You take care of my daughter or I will kill you" types, only the message was, if my daughter falls off her Christian path and ends up going to hell, I'm coming after you, buddy. The groom began to sob as he was being lectured, and it could not have been more awkward for the entire congregation. We watched the father dress down the groom, speak as if the bride had no control over her own life, and cause the poor boy to spend the rest of his wedding red-eyed and runny-nosed. Hubby and I went to his ex-wife's latest wedding at the request of their kids. This was her 4th or 5th wedding with her grown children in attendance. Floor-length white Cinderella wedding dress with everybody in tuxes. From a woman who lived off disability, welfare, and child support. Groom's sister realized bride had been married in this same church before, as she walked through the lobby shortly before the wedding asked, "Come here often?" I nearly wet myself laughing. Photographer wasn't pleased about something, so my hubby and I ended up in a lot of photos. Who doesn't want their ex-husband in their wedding pics? We made sure she changed her name and the kids were happy. I think the bride and groom ended up cleaning up the rented reception hall themselves because his family was not cooperating. We came home grateful that we'd just run down to the courthouse. My cousin's wedding was in October in the north of the US. It was an outdoor wedding and it was about 35 degrees and windy. Bridesmaids weren't allowed to wear jackets, and the groomsmen were only in vests and dress shirts, so everyone was freezing. Having planned the wedding in the summer, the programs were printed on fans. There were no microphones, so no one could hear the service over the wind. Oh well. The reception was super nice, and was clearly very well planned out by the bride, with cool centerpieces, handmade favors, nice food, all that. The problem was that the bride, not my cousin, was such a stereotypical bridezilla the previous months that no one wanted to be there. For instance, the previous 2 weeks she uninvited her sisters and parents 2 or 3 times and then re-invited them. After dinner the dancing starts. Within 15 minutes, literally the bride's entire family leaves. My wife and I are 2 of maybe 6 people dancing. We take a break, and the DJ comes over and asks us what we want to hear, and begs us to keep dancing. After an hour, there's only about 30 people still around. Of 200 guests. The bride spends the next 20 minutes dancing alone, as my cousin doesn't dance. Finally, she approaches the DJ, gesturing slicing her throat, and the reception abruptly ends. Only 8 people are left. All from the groom's family. I've been to worse weddings, but this was the worst experience because everything was so nice looking and set up to be a blast. I've never felt so uncomfortable. My brother-in-law's wedding was a disappointing sham. Everyone on our side of the family had to drive 3 hours to the bride's hometown, so her whole family could attend the wedding. When we get there, the bride and MOH are cooking the reception meal, because the mother of bride decided last minute that she didn't want to. The ceremony starts, and absolutely no one from the bride's family is there. The reception has no alcohol, no music whatsoever. We had to watch a 20 to 30 minute belly dancing performance, because one of her friends was a belly dancing instructor. My boyfriend and I were the only guests out of about 30 that had brought them a gift. Literally, there was a gift table with no envelopes or gifts at all on it. The bride's mother left the reception early because the thrift store was closing soon. By the time the reception ended, my boyfriend and I ended up helping the bride and groom clean the reception hall, because everyone else left. The real kicker is that we later found out that it was just a ceremony. No real marriage, because the bride wanted to stay married to a previous husband for financial reasons. This wedding was just a sham to convince her family that she had finally settled down with a good guy. I had a good time at this wedding, but that's partially because I was moderately drunk the whole time. My college roommate, Lauren, met this guy in Denmark the year after she graduated college. They started a long-distance relationship and got married about a year and a half after meeting. Majority of the guests were coming from out of state. We all attended college in state. She was from another, or out of the country, Denmark. It didn't occur to her to arrange transportation or even directions to and from the ceremony, which was at a state park half an hour away from the hotel where we were staying and where the reception was being held, for the 80% of her wedding guests who had flown in from other states and countries for this wedding. I found this out when I was helping her get ready and she asked for my phone, so she could Google where the park was in relation to the hotel, because the groom's grandpa had asked her for directions. I hitched a ride with my friend who had driven up, thank God. The ceremony was held next to a pretty waterfall, but it was hot as balls in mosquito season. Also, as the bride walked down the aisle, the ancient speaker that someone was sitting on a chair and holding a mic to, so that it was amplified more, died, so she walked down the aisle in silence. More highlights: no food was served at the reception other than small bites and a chocolate fountain. The wedding ceremony was in the afternoon and the reception was all evening. She didn't even provide a small buffet of anything moderately substantial. And trust me, money was not an option. She spent $8,000 on her dress and $8,000 on her flowers. So we stopped at Dairy Queen Grill and Chill before the ceremony for chicken strips and shakes. She only had an open bar for 1 hour, so all of us would wait in line, get the 2-drink max, and then just get in the back of the line to drink while we waited our turn for the next drinks. The dance floor was the size of a small walk-in closet, but that didn't really matter, because the DJ would literally play one song and then the groom's uncle, the MC of the event apparently, would introduce a video from someone on the groom's side of the family, who couldn't make the wedding but had put together a 5 to 7 minutes video in another language congratulating them. It went song, greeting from Bjorn, song, congratulations from the Knorkelsons, song, hello and love from Sirkeen and Merkin Avalicious for 3 hours. Anyway, I got pretty hammered and decided to shut down the club with an impromptu speech in which I quoted Jimmy Eat World lyrics and alluded to the bride's former affinity for Asians. Someone showed up in jeans. I did a shot in someone's hotel room with like 10 rugby players from the groom's side. I remember finding a cat somewhere. I woke up in my cocktail dress to QVC on my TV with my hand in between the pizza slice and the cheese that came on top of it. The end. My cousin's wedding was a doozy. The ceremony and reception were at this gorgeous hotel on the top of a mountain. The ceremony was held outside. It was beautifully staged, but a gusty day. We couldn't hear a word of the ceremony. The women were trying to keep their dresses and hair from flying all over the place, while the men kept getting smacked in the face with their ties. Then it was time for the reception. Our plates came to the table, and we cut into half raw chicken. We asked for new plates to be told they didn't have any extra, and the kitchen had been closed since the entrees were done. My husband and I were in from out of state for the wedding, and had carpooled with another cousin too. We were starving, so she gave us her car and directions to a nearby Subway. We slipped out, as we didn't want cousin 1 to realize what had happened and be upset. As we were finishing our subs, we get a call from cousin 2 telling us to get back there ASAP, as she needed to leave immediately. We pull up to the outside of the hotel, and cousin 2 is outside yelling at yet another cousin 3. Cousin 3's father then starts getting in cousin 2's face. At this point my mother steps in and breaks it up. Cousin 2 leaves. 5 minutes later the cops show up, as someone called about the fight. The groom then comes out and yells at everyone, and the cops end up leaving. Somehow we kept all of this from cousin 1, who had no idea that all of this ridiculousness was happening at her wedding. When I was stationed in California for language training, my then boyfriend and I had a couple of mutual friends who decided to get married. Now these two were some of the sweetest, kindest and most generous people I have known, but damn they were not very intelligent. I mean that in the sense that they both were book smart but just kind of vague and ditzy. The bride was white and the groom was mixed, black father and white mother. The bride's family were very southern and racist and did not approve of their perfect little girl marrying a black man. They would not pay for anything and didn't even give them a gift. The wedding was held in a small church that both the bride and groom attended, and the reception was held in the parking lot with food being served from the back of a truck. Now, it sounds like it could have been a cute country wedding but it was not. There were maybe 15 total guests including the families and a few of us fellow soldiers. My boyfriend and I were the only ones who brought a gift and I am so glad I splurged. We bought them a complete bathroom set with the rug and bathroom accessories and stuff, so it was a big basket that looked so out of place with no other presents. There were no chairs or tables for the reception, no music, nothing. It was literally a bunch of people awkwardly standing in a parking lot, eating some barbecue from a local barbecue shack, and watching the bride's family members try to ignore the groom's side. It was sad, but the bride and groom seemed to be oblivious to all of the tension and sincerely seemed joyful about their wedding. Last I heard, he was still in the service and they had 2 kids together and happy. I was super young, but my mother dragged myself and my sisters to a wedding of an old college friend of hers. The groom was either Greek Orthodox or Eastern Orthodox, and the bride was converting during the mass held before the wedding ceremony. The bride was in some sort of traditional headdress that looked amazing and weighed a ton in addition to the polyester wedding gown and corset from hell. The church was inhospitably hot, that's mostly what I remember, and the services were in a different language. Apparently part of the wedding ceremony involved the bride and groom circling the altar several times at a brisk jog. The bride passed out in lap 2, and the groom and her bridesmaids held her up while the priest, who didn't drop the beat at her fainting, kept droning on. When it came time for the actual verbal exchange of vows, the bride was slapped lightly and wakened long enough to mumble incoherently. Her father told the priest that she agreed to the wedding and voila. The poor girl was summarily carted outside by her parents to await the ambulance that someone thought to call, and her mother half-stripped the bride out of her gown and corset, and ripped the headdress off with such force that it tore out a chunk of hair. Good times. My uncle's wedding, many years ago, was so awful that the whole thing was sort of beautiful. An hour after the wedding was supposed to start, neither the bride nor the groom was there. All of the guests were there though, among them my cousin, a young handsome athlete who'd injured his leg and was on crutches. The bridesmaids, the bride's sisters, got into the liquor. They started relentlessly and drunkenly hitting on my cousin, who tried to get away from them but couldn't escape them on his crutches. My uncle finally showed up. His car had broken down and he'd had to hitchhike, in a white tux, to his wedding. He was picked up by a guy on a blood run. The bride eventually showed up even later. She'd apparently stepped off the curb to leave and broken her heel off. She'd had to go back and try to fix it with glue. On her way back out the door the second time, she'd stopped to give her hair an extra spray, and accidentally sprayed it with a can of Lysol instead, causing her to go shower and entirely redo her hair and makeup. When the bride and groom were finally both there, they realized no one had brought the music. So everyone walked down the aisle in dead silence with drunk bridesmaids and half of the original guest list present. The wedding went better than the marriage. Soon-to-be groom cheats on bride, gets caught. Bride tells groom she'll go through with the wedding if he still wants to. They get married, Everyone at the reception is in tears, not an understatement, because of how bad of a move it was on the newlyweds' part. Fights break out between families, more tears, you get the point. Groom is still a serial cheater and I feel morally obligated to tell the bride, but everyone tells me to keep my nose out of their business. I generally don't butt into anyone's personal life, but during a long talk about how she wished things didn't play out this way she said, if I ever found out he cheated again, I'd leave in a heartbeat.